Hey guys, thank you for watching this video, and I want to talk to you about the PCNSE interface types that you need to know. So if you're studying for the PCNSE exam, the Palo Alto's security engineer exam, then you need to know about 10 different interface types, and that's what I'm going to go through in this video. And I'm going to show you my firewall in the lab to see what those interface types look like. Now, if I dive into the firewall, the first one that we're going to look at is going to be the tap interface. So I'll select the interface 1.5, and to change an interface into a tap interface, it's actually this drop down right here, interface type, and select tap. Now, next up, we have the virtual wire interface, which is used to deploy a firewall transparently into an environment where you can bind two interfaces and configure them as a virtual wire. This allows you to just have a firewall as a bump in the network, be able to actually deploy and support security policies and other firewall features. So in the firewall, if we look at that, we'll take a look at first on the left virtual wires. You actually have to have that configured first. So I'll click add here at the bottom. You give it a name, and then you can give it a tag as well. But you also need to select which interfaces are going to be part of that virtual wire. Now you can see I don't have any interfaces I can select, and that's because under interfaces, I guess that's what I should have said you should do first, is you got to select the two interfaces and change the interface type to virtual wire. Once you do that, I'll do interface 1.5 and 1.6. You should be able to see one of those two interfaces there. I only configured one, but you should be able to see at least one of those interfaces now as a option for virtual wire. There are layer 2 interfaces that you could configure on your firewall, and this really just provides switching between networks. So your firewall will be connected, one of its interfaces will be connected to a layer 2 segment. From a firewall perspective, it's not going to do any routing, but you can provide some sort of inline protection or firewall inspection and threat prevention. So if we dive into that, we can click on, again, Ethernet 1.5, change the interface type down to layer 2, and that's it. The layer 3 interface is the most widely used interface I use on a Palo Alto Networks firewall, and it supports IPv4 and also IPv6. And the way it uses that simultaneously is through dual stack. Now, when you configure layer 3 interfaces, you have to configure an IPv4 and or IPv6 address, include its zone and also its virtual router. And we can see that under here with Ethernet 1.5 again. You can change the interface type to layer 3. And see down here under config, now you have to select the virtual router. I'll have a default one. You can set a security zone as well if you'd like, but here's where I set up an IPv4 address. There's a tab for IPv6 if you want to use that as well. The next interface is the aggregate interface. I like using an aggregate interface, which allows you to combine multiple interfaces and have one single virtual interface using 802.1ax. Now, this allows you to also add VLAN tags to it. So instead of configuring multiple interfaces on separate networks, I can use the aggregate Ethernet and create subinterfaces, which I'll talk about later, and be able to use just maybe 2 physical ports instead of 8 physical ports to a switch. To configure that, you actually need to configure an aggregate Ethernet interface. You can do that down here under add aggregate group. I've already created one, so you can see here that I've assigned it as the AE1, the number 1 here when you configure it. Actually, I'll go in here and create another one. So you have to assign it a number, so I'll do 2, and also select the interface type. So in this case, I'll select layer 3. You could assign this to a virtual router, hit OK, and then you're going to select the interfaces that are going to be part of that aggregate group, or the aggregate Ethernet. So you click on an interface, change the interface type down to aggregate Ethernet, and also assign it to which aggregate group it should belong into. And that's the aggregate Ethernet interface. Now we're into sub interfaces. I talked about that with the aggregate Ethernet interface. Now a sub interface is a virtual interface that can be deployed into different zones. You create the sub interface from the parent interface or the physical interface, and it could be a layer 2 or a layer 3 configuration, but why don't I just show you? So you can see here I have one interface in my lab, firewall Ethernet 1.2. That is the physical interface, and I've created a sub interface off of it. So if I select, make sure this is selected right here, go down to the bottom, I can then add a sub interface. Now I have to assign a number to that sub interface, and usually I use a VLAN tag number, so I know that this sub interface here is part of VLAN 50. And then you can configure the virtual router and IPv4 or IPv6 configurations from there. And that's great when you're using aggregate Ethernet as well, so you don't have to use physically all these ports for different networks. Now we're on the Loopback interface. Now the Loopback interface is a virtual interface. You can assign it to a virtual router, and also it could be used for other network engineering purposes as well. Most commonly, what I've used it in the past is for something like Global Protect services. Now, to configure a Loopback interface, it's slightly different from your other network interfaces in that you do go to network interfaces, but instead of under the Ethernet section up here, you're going to click on Loopback. And from there, you can click Add down below. And I'll look into this one Loopback interface, but you can see that it's not attached to a virtual router or security zone, and it does not have an IPv4 address, but those are the parameters that you can configure for a Loopback interface. The next interface is a tunnel interface, and it's used for VPN configuration. You can set it up on a security zone and have policies applied to it as well. I use the tunnel interface for Global Protect services, but you can assign an IP address if routing is needed. It does not have to have an IP address, but if we take a look at tunnel interfaces, again, it's going to be under this tunnel option here at the top. And you can see I have a tunnel interface configured because I have configured Global Protect on this firewall. And if we look at that, it is assigned to my default virtual router, and also in the security zone of Global Protect. And I do have an IPv4 address assigned to it. Now there's also a Decrypt interface. I don't have this option on my firewall, or I have not even found it yet. But the Decrypt interface is used with the decryption port mirror feature, and it's allowing you to support routing of decrypted traffic to an external service such as data loss prevention or a tool to analyze packet captures. And now this is supposed to be found under the network options and then interfaces. And from the interface, you can select the interface type of decrypt mirror. And then we'll dive into the next interface. The VLAN interface. It's used to provide routing into a layer 3 network, or it can be added to a layer 2 Ethernet port to a VLAN interface. So there are multiple uses for this depending on your use case and also your environment. But in order to configure that VLAN interface, you go up here to the top and click on VLAN. And from there, you can click on Add to create this VLAN interface, assign it a number here. The way I would name it is with the VLAN tag number. So if it's VLAN 10, I'm going to put 10 there. And then from here, you can select the VLAN that you want to assign this VLAN interface to. I don't have one configured, but from here, you can click on New VLAN and create that VLAN, and also the virtual router or security zone, so you can also have policies applied to it. So those are the 10 interface types that you need to know if you're studying for the PCNSE certification and want to pass that exam. This video I created from my notes. So down in the description below, you'll find a link to my blog where I have my notes on the interface types. If you found this video useful, go ahead and give me a like on the video and I would appreciate it. But I want to thank you for watching this video. Bye guys.